already been addressed by the committee during its deliberation as we went through the other clauses. So what is to come from the ministry would be those clauses that specifically the committee or those concerns that the committee did not address its mind to. So I believe, Ministry, we will turn over to you now.
Good morning, everyone. The document that we'll be looking at is dated July 17, 2020. It's a matrix that sets out the stakeholders and the legal team comments and recommendations for Clause 4. So we begin by looking at the first definition, administrative control. The CPC raised that in the definition of administrative control, kindly clarify what is meant by hazard correction procedure. Our response is hazard correction procedure in the definition of administrative control means any procedure that implements a method of changing the way of working to correct identified hazards and includes measures as outlined in the paragraphs following the chapeau.
Yes, Mrs. Seeley. Yes.
I was wondering if in that case we shouldn't add the word procedure to the definition. Is that we administrative control by itself, when it is defining a procedure, is kind of strange. So I'm proposing we either speak to an administrative procedure, which would mean a correction procedure, which includes flexi work arrangements, etc., or administrative control procedure, which would, so we, we sync the whole idea of correction procedure with the definition of administrative control.
So what is before us, the suggestion from OCPC is that we seek to define administrative control procedure or administrative procedure.
I would think, Chairman, just going to hazard, hazard biological agent, hazardous biological agent, hazardous chemical, hazardous physical agent, hazardous substance, but we don't have hazardous correction procedure being defined there, and maybe we should insert it under after hazardous biological, or whichever order it comes in.
Yes.
So, Chair, we're going to be including that definition of hazard correction procedure in the, I think we should, in the definition section.
Mrs. Seeley Brown, am I to understand now that you have taken on what Member Brown is suggesting in addition to your earlier point? Okay, very well. Mr.
Yes.
Yes. So you had suggested administrative control procedure.
Or administrative
procedure. So we'll hear from the ministry. And also, what is another suggestion is that we include in our definition section clause 4, hazard correction procedure. Ministry?
Just want to point out that hazard administrative control, this is a technical language that is used both in academia and ILO. It's an international accepted nomenclature for this definition. Also, if you were to skip to page 10, the ministry is proposing a definition for hazard correction procedure to satisfy what Member Brown had just raised. Page 10 of the matrix.
That's the document we were served this morning.
Where can I find that definition for administrative control? In which document? Yeah, is it somewhere?
Yes, you can check like the ILO conventions as well.
So you're suggesting that it stays as is because of that? That's what you're saying?
Well, not to change it to say administrative control procedure, but just leave it at administrative control.
Okay, if that's a different definition.
So,
I heard it, but that was back to Mr. Silly. What was the rationale for you suggesting that? I just want to be clear.
Just to be, the term by itself, administrative control, when you're speaking of a procedure, just appears off in language for me, to me. I just thought that the fact that you're defining some sort of procedure, it should also form part of the defining term. But if it's an accepted term and you've used the same definition, as is in the ILO convention, have you used the same definition?
Well, not verbatim, but as you could recognize that even for A, we brought in flexible work arrangements, which is really closer to our language in terms of the flexi work policy.
I would have liked to have checked it, Chair, but we don't have internet right now.
Chair,
Check it.
Member Gill?
just to be satisfied,
Yes.
I'm dealing with the term administrative control.
Yeah, it's not.
Yes.
If the definition is the same definition that is in the ILO convention,
It's not going on.
that's what I wanted to ascertain from Mr. Mahan.
Mrs. Madden Campbell? Yeah. Okay, right.
I know though that flexible work arrangements wouldn't have been in the ILO because we were trying to give effect to our legislation here. So it probably would more be B and C.
Chairman, could I be helped in understanding how the flexi work fits in here?
Mrs. Madden Campbell?
Legal reform has been raising a concern because what he was asking, they were asking what exactly were we trying to give effect to? We were trying to give effect to the 12-hour cap, which we have done somewhere else in the legislation in 19.3J, I believe it is. So we had at first said we could delete the flexible work arrangements term. So we may have to go back because we have given effect to 12 hours. But in terms of the rotation of workers, it's to make sure that persons from a safety and health perspective are not overworked, which will affect their safety and health. But in terms of the flexible work arrangements, we did give effect to what we wanted, which is the 12 hours. So we could delete the word flexible work arrangements here, because in 19.3J we were specific in terms of the 12 hours cap that we were wanted to give effect to in OSHA specifically.
So it's not the 12 hour, it's not the flexi work, because in our legislation I have a lot of things. You're talking about the hours of work. You're talking about the hours of work being maximum 12 hours per day.
When the Joint Select Committee that considered flexible work arrangements had met and made their suggestions and recommendations to Parliament, they had, part of it was for the 12-hour cap to be put in place. Legislatively, it was really because of a safety and health concern. So while we passed the Flexible Work Arrangement Facilities Provisions Bill, which made amendments to Minimum Wage Act, shops and offices, for example, we had promised Parliament at that time that in OSHA is where we would have to put the 12-hour cap that is widely applicable, subject to regulations. We did not have any other legislation apart from shops where we could have put it. So, and because it was a safety and health perspective, so what we're trying to do now is to give effect to what we had told Parliament at the time that bill was being debated, that we would address that in OSHA, which would be of wider application to workplaces.
Yes.
Morning, everyone. I came late, so I'm not really sure if what I'm going to say makes any sense. Could we then possibly say, since you don't want to use flexi work arrangement, could you say where someone completes, you can still say flexi working arrangements where someone completes a work day of 12 hours within a day, within that day? Can it be stated like that?
Well, it's already in 19.3J in this bill, you know. That provision is in 19.3J, which is why I didn't need the flexible work arrangements.
All I'm saying is, through the chair, flexible work arrangement is broad. And what I'm hearing you to be saying, you're concerned about the hours of work per day.
12 hours.
Maximum, because
Right,
that's
that
what it
the
is.
That the Joint Select
It's not
Committee
that it's
had.
a 12-hour work day, it is a maximum of 12 hours. The issue, how do you deal with, I just want just to clear, somebody doing a double 8-hour shift. That's a 16, which is the norm in many manufacturing places. Is that to be outlawed?
It does say subject to exemptions in regulations, because before the ministry, although the Joint Select Committee wanted a 12-hour
Past
cap.
Giant Select
Yeah, but
Committee. We have a bill. We have a bill.
It said subject to exemptions in regulations, so the ministry would have to consult, because you have the health sector and you have different sectors to determine who would be exempt from regulations from the 12-hour cap.
Yes, Member Longmore, you're on the floor. I'm acknowledging you.
Sorry, thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. It's not my purview, but I mean, I would imagine that a double shift would be, it's a voluntary choice, or it's a choice for an established work arrangement. So I don't think that would fall into any disrepute in terms of work hours and flexible work hours. I don't know, I'm guided by the labor experts.
I apologize for being late.
Yes.
The problem is how it's being worded. So if it's being worded in such a way to say that it cannot be done, you're going to have a problem.
Yes, yes.
I mean, even you talk about healthcare, even in the legal, there are times when we go to a meeting and it goes on and on and on. Are you going to exempt Parliament
when you're talking
the
healthcare,
Senate
you're talking
decides
about
to sit until almost near 2 a.m. and we get there from
Doctors are on call sometimes for the entire weekend. When I'm on call for the entire week. So I'm sure that there are specific regulations that see to those exemptions.
Yes, Member Gill.
It leaves, it seeks some clarity in terms of what the ministry is trying to achieve. Because how it's, we have a lot of conversation. This has become
Member Gill is on the floor. Please, members. Can you turn off your mic, Member Longmore? Yes.
Yes, Chair.
Yes, yes,
Maybe
yes,
I
yes.
need a gavel.
Yes. Yes.
Chair, really, it really
Yes.
determines what the ministry is trying to achieve, because how it's worded here suggests that there may be a restriction of working beyond 12 hours when you may have a situation where the exigence arise for the employee to extend themselves in order to meet certain objectives, which might be cited as overtime, or might be cited in a situation where they may be rostered to work extended hours, rather to be on call, or even to be on standby in certain situations. What I believe they are seeking to do is not to overburden the worker. But how it's written here, you can have a situation where a worker might, whether voluntary or otherwise, work beyond the normal working time. This appears in my mind to propose some sort of a restriction. And it may very well pose a challenge, because an employer would come and say, well, the occupational safety and health legislation has proposed that you ought not to work more than a certain time.
And Member Gill, you're referring to 19.3J, or 19.3J seems to be of relevance here. I do not know if members have had sight of 19.3J.
And you see, subject to the exceptions in the prescribed regulations. So it is proposing a set of exemptions to be determined by a minister whenever.
Well, I know Mrs. Bennett Campbell did raise the point that, of course, this is subject to consultation.
Mr. Chair, if I
Yes,
may,
legal reform.
Just for clarification, I believe a previous parliament did adopt and accept a particular policy which is in line with what I believe the Ministry of Labour is trying to introduce. So if it is, well, I'm not sure if, well, maybe I need to see how it unfolds, the discussion. If it is they're moving away from that policy, or, because I believe, I don't have the policy in front of me now, but I believe the decision of Parliament at the time was that no one should work beyond 12 hours per day as a general rule.
We need that policy document here,
Chairman,
but I want to hear some more.
as the one who is responsible, let me say it clearly, for the 12-hour being inserted in the bill, ask Pernell. The idea is that you could work up to 12 hours instead of just 8 hours. It's not that 12 hours would be the maximum, because we recognize that the norm, not the norm, the regular in industry, people work a double shift of 8 hours. And so it was intended to put a maximum for the work day, but no single shift should be more than 12 hours. We know, for example, security guards. Security guards are working from 7 to 7. That's a 12-hour shift. We know, for example, in the backside sector, we introduced the 12-hour shift. And, Chairman, you can't get the workers to come out for that 12-hour shift. And if they're going to work extra, they can't work more than 4 hours, which is what the normal 2 shift would have been for overtime. I give you a case. Our firefighters now have elected to work a 24-hour shift. And as a union man, I said to them, boy, that's in breach of the law. But in terms of their work arrangement, they don't want to give it up. So the brigade just extended it, and it's going to be a fight when time comes to end it, because it gives them certain amount of days off and so forth. So the idea is not to, at 19.3J, Chairman, is not to make it a maximum per work day, but per shift, per any single shift. And I think that would capture it.
Chairman, if I may,
Yes.
because I was involved to an extent with the whole flexi work, with the legislative amendments and review of the policy. The cap that was inserted or discussed, as I recall, was in terms of a week, in terms of over 40, the 40-hour week, not to have a cap for 12 hours. I mean, I can go back and check my records, because the whole discussion was about, the only cap I recall that was agreed was the one for the week. And then over that, anything over, and you could have, in fact, I remember the discussion about getting to your 40 hours, however, but once you reach the 40 hours, then that would be no overtime, and also you were supposed to take a break as well. But with respect, having regard to the pandemic, I really don't think that there is anything wrong with using the terminology flexi work arrangement. We have, from the Chamber's perspective, we have had to do a lot of research, because we are developing our own flexi work policy. I don't think you want to just deal with whether you're going to cap a work day or even a work week. I don't think that in light of what we are all now learning, that we want to just limit this concept of flexi work arrangements to just how many hours a day or a week you work. Flexi work arrangements is much more than that. In fact, some of the things that are in 4.1a, rotation of workers, that's all part of flexi work arrangements. So in fact, all you needed to have in A was flexi work arrangements, and you could have deleted the rest of what is there. And I would caution us, the committee, going ahead and trying to just prescribe in a very narrow and restrictive way when the way of the world is now changed. We have changed, and we're not going back to what we were before. And I think we should embrace the wider concept of flexi work arrangement, which, as far as I understand, is now a term of art. And again, we did some research because we are also trying to develop our own flexi work policy. And we have been looking into certain concepts. So the whole thing about work from home is really work off-site, because you know you can work not just at home, you could work in a coffee shop, well. So the whole point is work off-site. We don't usually even call it no work from home, really. But I would not want us to limit or try to prescribe flexi work arrangements in such a narrow way.
I'll take Dr. Robinson before I come back to you. Has been here for some time. Yes,
Thank
Doctor.
you. Morning, everybody. So I had two points that I wanted to get some clarification on, but can't recall her name. I think
Soldier, just say Soldier.
Soldier, right. I think she clarified one of the points that I wanted to make. I wanted to ask that very question about the flexible work arrangement. Is the intention of administrative control to exclude other areas related to flexible work arrangements, such as even remote work? Because that is the apparent new norm for now. And you may recall this case, I think it is in New South Wales, where that team member was actually killed at home. And the ruling from the appeal court was that this team member was actually working, was killed while being at work. And so therefore, employers have to bear in mind the hazards associated with working from home. So is it that we want to limit this administrative control to hours of work and not include other areas associated with flexible work arrangement? That's the first one. The second one, I think Senator Brown clarifies that as well. Having worked in the bauxite industry, I wanted to ask a question about this 12-hour work week, if that's the intention, because where persons work on that 12-hour shift, if they do an overtime session, it's possible that they could be working 16 hours, which is not unusual, right? And I wanted to know, again, if this was intended to restrict that, and how would you propose doing that? So those are my two points. Thanks.
Member Gill?
Chair, I don't believe it was ever the intention of the committee to restrict the flexible work arrangement just in the ambit of work hours, because we are fully aware that flexible work arrangements, even by that piece of legislation that was passed, notwithstanding the fact that there's no code that supports it, speak of how you work, where you work, and it has become the norm now. A lot of organizations have developed are seeking to develop work from home policies. And more often now, we're finding that employers are promoting more flexible work arrangements, and workers have been calling for it. So I think we really just need to leave it as clear as possible, rather than just specifically talking about the working time and just deal with a flexible work, what a flexible work arrangements is, instead of this, what is being proposed as a restriction in order to achieve a particular objective.
All right, so what is before us is, I gather, Ministry, before you come in, is that 401A, they are suggesting that 401A should just only read flexible work arrangements. Am I correct, Soldier?
So that was my proposal.
Chairman, just to clarify something. What I'm reading at 401, administrative control means any hazard correction procedure. So flexi work is a hazard correction procedure. I don't think that's our intention in respect to flexi work. It's not an hazard we're trying to correct.
But to an extent, well, in dealing with the pandemic, it has been. So for instance, one example, the orders under the Disaster Risk Management Act, for instance, are encouraging employers to enter into flexible work arrangements where they know that employees can't maintain a 6 feet physical distancing. That's mitigation. So I'm just saying, and asking employers to then do things like rotation of staff and so. So I'm saying it can work as it may not primarily be a hazard mitigation, but it can also be.
It can be, but bear in mind that this is a 2017 bill. Clearly it never envisaged the pandemic. So I don't want us to take the pandemic to be the bill, right? But flexi work was, when the flexi work arrangement came, efficiency was the name of the game. We're looking to see how we could make industry more efficient, not security. But I take the Solgen point that flexi work can be a response to hazard, like the pandemic. But that's not what the flexi work is about, and we shouldn't therefore describe flexi work in the terms of a hazard mitigating thing. It may be one way of mitigating the hazard, but certainly flexi work arrangement shouldn't be so classified.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Mr. Simmons.
From my perspective, from the LRD's perspective, we're still uncomfortable with that phrase. The mere fact that it's even generating some discussion here suggests that we're not all on the same page as to what those words mean. And I'm suggesting that maybe we look back at it some more and then come back on it. But I think we need to get the perspective of the Minister of Labour as to what they intended, which they have said. But what they intended, there's an understanding from persons who are part of the making of the policy at the time that it meant something else. And I can tell you, even behind the scenes, it has also generated some discussion. And I can foresee a problem with us leaving the term flexible work arrangements in the Act as is, if it should go before a court and they're called upon to interpret it. So I'm suggesting that we probably leave it for now and then come back to it another time.
Chair,
Yes.
I'm in agreement, and I'm just wondering if we can't be guided by other jurisdictions, especially with respect to the effect of the pandemic and revisions that may be happening. I think in the back of my mind, I'm remembering hearing a discussion coming out of Barbados around the flexible work hours, so perhaps we could get some guidance from their legislation also.
Yes, Mrs. Silva.
What the definition? Well, two things I want to say. I would like to see how it's defined in the ILO convention to make sure that we are adopting it properly. And if it's a case where we have a problem with the use of the word flexi work arrangements, as Mrs. Aldred was saying, even if you look at the words that which follow, the rotation of workers and the timing of work, wouldn't that in itself include some form of flexi work arrangement, whether it's by legislation or by, as may be prescribed. So if we have a problem using the flexi work arrangement term, I think that the rules which follow can cover it. We don't need to have both. And if there's a problem with the flexi work arrangement, that term, I think that we can go with the rotation of workers and the timing of work, and I think that would cover everything that's it. But I'm still not comfortable with the entire definition. I need to see how it's defined in the ILO.
And also to endorse what Member Brown mentioned in terms of the link of the flexible work arrangements to only hazardous situations.
Ministry?
Absent from it, you know, whilst you have the rotation of work and the timing of work, the only thing that is absent from it is where you work, in terms of site.
I still am so confused. There's a way to interpret the word ordinary English. Flexible. You know what flexible means? As a grammatical, you just go to the dictionary. I really don't think there's a problem. I think when we start to prescribe what we want, you're going to run into a problem. With the greatest of respect, there's nothing wrong with the term because you use ordinary dictionary arrangement. You know what a work arrangement is, and we've put the word flexible. You look it up in the dictionary. It tells you what flexible means. It means that there is some give and take with those work arrangements. I'm very wary, but I agree that well, you see, it depends on the intention of this bill, which is why you may have these opening words, the words in the chapeau about the hazard correction procedure, which I'm also very wary of. But if the intention of this bill is only to deal with flexi work as a means of a hazard correction procedure, well, that's a policy. But to me, I think we need to understand why that is the policy. Because we have no other law that can really give full effect to the flexi work policy.
That's
because
no
you
point.
don't have any grounding legislation to implement it. So when the Parliament went years ago, it just removed barriers from different pieces of legislation. It, however, did not fully implement the policy because you didn't have anything to ground it in. So the question I would ask the ministry is, was it the intention to ground it in this legislation?
The ministry paper that had circulated previously, that was tabled in respect of flexible work arrangements, is recirculated to members and everybody looks at the wording of it. Because no, I'm answering a point for earlier. I was trying to get in and didn't get in earlier. Because the ministry paper does set out the different parameters and we're trying to give effect to it. So for us to do that, we'd have to look at the ministry paper that was previously circulated. So I will circulate it again so we can look back at the word in relation to the 12 hours.
Chairman, I want to make it clear that had there been no long discussion in the country and in the world about the term flexi work arrangement, I could agree with my friend, the Solicitor General.
Yes.
But Mrs. Bennett Campbell's explanation took us first to the set of legislation, and therefore, while the ordinary English meaning as a thing, there is a term of art that is called flexi work. And we need to make sure that that have no part of the ordinary English meaning, because my understanding is that the 1201 order that is rooted in legislation we have passed. And so when we talk flexi work now, the ordinary understanding of it, whether it's rooted or not, the odd is connected. So the ordinary person who hear flexi work go back to the Ministry of Labour, to the legislation we passed. So if we want to make it clear that what we're saying here is that any change in the work, and so we don't need to use flexi work. So any change in the work to deal with an hazard is administrative control. I'm fine with that, but once you use flexi work, you start confusing some of us brains as to what it is, and I think that's what legislation shouldn't do. It should be clear.
All right, Mrs. Bennick. Yes.
You realize, Chair, the way it's defined and the way it's used in clause
19.3.
Yeah, it's kind of strange. It's kind of different, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you,
19.3J.
Okay.
Yes. Ministry, yes, Mrs. Benekama.
I'm not sure. Because they're saying without the
Well, I
wording-
understand that you're saying that you are going to circulate the policy paper, so members
Yeah,
can
and I
have
do
sight of what
Yeah.
the policy was, and then we
Yeah.
will revert to this particular
Right,
provision.
and we did put this provision actually in the Shops and Offices Act. It is in the Shops and Offices Act because that was the only legislation where we could have put it. So my recollection, but anyway, I'll be guided by the ministry paper because that is what was tabled and what Parliament approved.
So we're going to move on.
No, but before we move on, because
Yes.
what I am deducing is that the ministry seem to be wanting to keep the notion of it to 12 hours as in 19.3. So is it that beyond 12 hours, that's the hazard you want to correct?
No, what I said is that from my recollection of the ministry paper, it did say for safety and health reasons there should be a cap of 12 hours in terms of safety and health.
No, I'm clear now. I'm clear
So
on that.
all we were trying to do in 19.3J is to give effect to that ministry paper. So we would have to compare the wording of the ministry paper with what we have done to make sure that we are complying.
Yeah, and you have answered the question, and then again, because we are guided by the policies, and if you enforce it and that's the policy, I just want to be clear, is that the ministry is trying to ensure that in this bill, you have that 12-hour clearly stated.
That is the intent because we had promised in the debate in the House.
You want to get out of, make a decision, policy. So I just want to be clear as to where we are, because I've listened to the discussions, but I've not seen a clear path forward.
The ministry paper in question exists. I would just recirculate again. It was already approved and passed. So it's not a policy that I'm trying to pass.
I understand that you stated that, but I mean in terms of reading, analyzing, so as a committee member and all of us can be guided, I just want to know how long will that take? Because that is critical to, perhaps that will be even critical to other definitions that we want to approve today.
Well, it shouldn't be, but I will just recirculate it. I don't have it here with me. I didn't work with that file.
So before the next meeting, members, you will have the policy.
Yes?
Chairman,
Yes. I think that's
Yeah.
Mrs.
Chairman, just
Benekama.
before you
saying,
move
Yes.
on.
Yes.
So I will send it as quickly. By tomorrow, I will send it with a narrative of where I'm pointing you to in the document specifically.
Chairman,
So I will get it recirculated by tomorrow.
Yes, Member Brown.
you took us to 19.3J,
J. Yes.
right? Because it speaks to hours of work and time
Yes.
in work. I raised during the earlier sessions of this committee the issue of the inclusiveness of the lunch break. And it specifically states 1 hour. I asked if this was a policy decision of the ministry because it wasn't done in the other legislation. Trying to get this. It wasn't done in the other legislation that dealt with flexi work. But we are inserting it here from a trade union point of view. I have absolutely no objection. Just that I hope that in doing it, we are walking clearly in sight that this is a policy decision, that the public sector worker who now as is our 40 hour, exclusive of lunch, will now enjoy a 40 hour inclusive of lunch, which is equality, because I can never understand why some are there included, but others excluded, except for class, for classification if you want to avoid class. So this is a policy decision that I support, but all I ask is that let's walk there so that Dr. Robinson doesn't get up tomorrow and discover that the janitors and those who are working from 8 to 5 must either work now from 9 to 5 or 8 to 4, because their lunchtime that isn't counted in their 40 hours is going to be counted. So as I said, I am for that. We didn't do it in 73 when we changed the 40-hour work week. Better late than never, but let us be clear to the country. That's what we're doing. It have my support.
Yes, Mrs.
Tell you what my concern is.
Yes.
When we speak of administrative control here,
And you're referring to administrative
in the
control on
definition,
93.
yes, we're speaking of some sort of a corrective procedure or mechanism. But when we use it in the opposite way in clause 18(3)(j), because you say now, subject to these exceptions, the person conducting the business or undertaking must ensure that other administrative controls do not adversely affect occupational safety and health. Now, if you look at the sharp of the definition and the way the ministry intends to define a hazardous correction procedure, it is not gelling with how it is used here. It says either we sorry, Chair. Right, just regarding administration, yeah. That's the thing, Mrs. Aldred was just showing me that it is used in the CARICOM draft and it's not defined. So maybe we're running into issues because we're trying to define it and not quite understand.
And what is not defined in the CARICOM model?
Administrative control, yes.
Okay.
Yes, yes,
Okay.
yes.
Okay, very well. So clearly we will have to get back to this term. So I ask that we proceed with the understanding that we have to come back to this administrative control. So Mr. Mahon, you may now proceed to your next term.
Advisory Council. This is something that the ministry is recommending for it to be deleted from the bill based on the shifting policy for the establishment of the OSH authority.
Yes, so you are recommending that this be removed, as there is no need for an advisory council now having regards to the establishment of that OSH authority.
Yes.
Okay. Members? All right, proceed.
Agricultural undertaking. AGC comments. The definition of agricultural undertaking is very similar to the definition of agricultural activities, which is in the Agricultural Loan Societies and Approved Organizations Act 2017. However, there is one activity that is included in the definition of agricultural activities, which is not included in the definition of agricultural undertaking, namely reforestation. Is there a reason for reforestation being excluded? So the Joint Select Committee had considered this matter in the meeting held on June 10th, 2019. And in this regard, on page 3 of the said minutes, there was a decision. There was discussions around the whole concept of forestation and reforestation, and the decision was for it to be changed to say for forestry purposes. This is also reflected in the comments in the summary sheet of decisions made by the committee on clauses 1 to 118. The committee agreed that in the definition of agricultural undertaking, at paragraph B, the word afforestation is to be deleted and the words forestry purposes are to be inserted.
Yes, Member Brown, you wish to?
We took that decision already.
Okay, very
Time to
well.
move on.
Proceed, Mr. Mahon.
All right, this would also satisfy legal reform department's comment. So we're going to rather at subparagraph G in the definition of agricultural undertaking, after the word keeping, a comma and the word production should be inserted. So this suggestion is supported by the ministry.
We agree? Move on, Mr. Mahon.
In the definition of agricultural undertaking, a new subparagraph K should be inserted along with the words agricultural disaster risk management. The ministry does not support that suggestion. The activity of agricultural disaster risk management is not viewed as an agricultural undertaking as contemplated in the bill. Agricultural disaster risk management is a means of improving linkages between humanitarian and development interventions in preparing for natural disaster as it relates to agriculture, food, security, and nutrition. So just to say, on August 8, 2008, the Ministry of Agriculture had launched its National Disaster Risk Management Program that sought to achieve several objectives that were primarily concerned with sensitizing sector stakeholders and the general populace on the importance of making adequate preparations to minimize the damage caused by natural and other disasters and measures to speedily rebound from the resultant damage. So it's not an undertaking, this is really just a program.
Any comment, members? The ministry is not prepared to accept the suggestion as put forward by legal reform.
Chair, I'm not opposed to the ministry's position.
Okay, fine.
And if I could just urge us, we go on the agriculture undertaking, the other two they support. And those are decisions we took. But I'm wondering if after all of these clauses and after J, whether we shouldn't have a catch-all, which after J on page 5, come on. You know, whether we shouldn't have a catch-all clause.
Mrs. C.D. Brown?
Having defined these out, having defined them out, anything outside of this is excluded. And I'm wondering if we could have a clause which says any similar activity or something like that, so we don't lock ourselves out.
So they're so wide and yeah, I'm not sure. I think we should just stick to whatever definition we had, how it's defined in the other legislation, and not try to, redefine it necessarily for the purposes of this act, Chair. Because I'm seeing terms like on-farm water management and greenhouse and sheltered agricultural practices, and I'm not sure if those are terms of art or if they terms of art or if they're terms that we would need to. So what is the problem the ministry has with sticking with the definition in another place, the one that you adopted here? Why are we widening it for the purposes of this act?
Yes. Yes.
When you go right up to H, up to I, it speaks of agricultural undertakings external. And then J now deals with the internal in terms of greenhouse and sheltered agricultural practices. I can't really think of any other thing that is not covered.
So J, you are suggesting Member Gill is a catch-all.
They're asking for rewording of J to speak to protected agriculture, which I think is very vague. They're asking for us to delete J.
Okay, so they're asking for it to be substituted for the words protected agriculture. But the ministry will
tell me what constitutes protected. Is it in a laboratory? And shelter don't cover that for me.
All right, Ministry, you're adopting the suggestions as put forward by RADA here, dealing with I and J. OCPC is seeking to have an understanding as to why we are taking them on board.
Well, we had to rely on RADA being an expert in agriculture, but I mean, we did our research as well. For example, on-farm water management, it is defined as a systems approach towards controlling water on a farm in a manner that provides for the beneficial management of water for satisfying irrigation and draining needs of crop under the constraints imposed by prevailing physical, social, governmental, or production systems. So it seems to be speaking about the manner in terms of irrigation, what you would probably be putting in the farm to ensure that you have proper management of water. So if you have that happening, then it would be considered as part of the agricultural undertaking. As it relates to the definition of agricultural undertaking in subpart G, and should be read to say protected agriculture instead of greenhouse and sheltered agricultural practices, I think when the representative from RADA came and did the PowerPoint and the submission at the time, it would have appeared as if greenhouse was really, and shelter was really limited. Protected agriculture is a wider concept which would fall within what Senator Gale was saying. It could be considered to try and capture and not limit just the greenhouses and those type of internal agricultural practices.
So, members, before us are two suggestions that the ministry has decided to take on board. Do we support the inclusion of on-farm water management at I, and also the rewording of J to read protected agriculture?
Where did you say we're going to put on-farm water management?
Mr. Mohan, is that in I, subclause I?
No, we would not be replacing I, but
just where you would insert it.
Yes.
It's L.
Eh?
The new one.
So it would be a new new insertion. So it would be after J, it would be K. On-farm
Insertion
water
of-
management. So fine, very well.
Yes, sir.
Yes, Mrs. Seeley Brown. Oh.
Because I'm looking at where are we inserting production? Do we speak to production of livestock? Production is unknown, you know, manufacture, making, construction, building, fabrication. It's the same definition, Chair, in paragraph G, where they wanted us to insert after keeping up production. Why are we inserting production? Yeah. You can speak to like an agricultural production, which is your output or your yield, but when you use the word production here, even in its ordinary meaning, it doesn't fit well with livestock or poultry in my view.
The current word there now.
So that would be breeding?
The current word there now is a reproductive element.
It says,
and the production is divided of that reproductive.
I don't
Okay.
know.
That's what I understand to be.
Well,
They are moving it beyond breeding to include whatever element that the science.
It may include,
that the
it
science.
may include variety.
You know, it deals with what the science is able to do.
So, Mr. Mohan, you have heard the comment from Mrs. Seeley Brown. I know we have already taken a position to support that inclusion, but I do not, do you have any comments in respect of the concern raised?
Well, what we could probably do is just to get back with RADA to satisfy the concerns raised in terms of production, because I listened to what Ms. Seeley Brown has said and what Member Brown has said as well in terms of breeding, maybe not traditionally, maybe other type of, right? So, yes.
So members, we agree to the inclusion of K as on-farm water management. For J, I think we are to get back to J now and take a position that the words there be substituted for protected agriculture.
I think the words that are there clear and fine: greenhouse and sheltered agricultural practices. I think if we're going to use this term that is being proposed,
Yes.
we're going to have to define it.
Very well.
Protected agriculture. I think it.
Very well.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
Yes. Mr. Simmons, you have a comment? Yes.
I'm agreeing with the CPC that if you're going to use protected agriculture, because I've heard of greenhouse and sheltered, which I
Yes.
believe are terms of art, which I'm not sure about the protected agriculture. Maybe it's a term of art, no, but I just never heard of it.
Very well. Members, any comments? So, Ministry, what is before us? I see from your matrix you are supporting the recommendation of RADA, but the legal teams are advising that RADA's suggestion should be rejected at this stage. Yes.
Farm water management.
No, we have accepted that already.
Okay.
We're at J, where they are saying RADA has put forward that protected agriculture be used instead of the language as stated in greenhouse and sheltered agricultural practices. And what OCPC and legal reform is saying that greenhouse and sheltered agricultural practices are already terms of art. And if we are going to take on board protected agriculture, we will have to define that. So they are not in support of RADA's suggestion here.
Chairman, I'd love to hear from RADA.
Very well.
While it's not a term of art that we are familiar outside of agriculture, maybe it is a term of art in agriculture, because 20 years ago, greenhouse wasn't even on our lips. And so 5 years from now, indeed 5 months from now, there may be new technology.
But I even wonder, but
No, it's not what it's about the new, whatever will come. I don't mind the greenhouse. I don't like Juliet's green dress, but
it looks pretty.
But what I'm saying is not the what is here now, is the what may come. I mean, I was trying to look hydrophone, but I suspect it's taken care of here. But it's just a new thing. I can grow my fruits in my flower spot.
But even greenhouse and sheltered agriculture, I mean, greenhouse would fall under sheltered. Sheltered encompasses greenhouse. So I think the protected agriculture is more of the technologically advanced practices that you see an enclosed farming practice, which would be sheltered. So why not just use sheltered agriculture? Well, that's what Member Brown is saying. Let us find out from RADA what they specifically meant, because I think that is also quite
Well,
necessary.
we are checking to see if
But the submission.
their submission, they had provided any explanation
because
for that.
why I'm saying
Failing
that,
which
Chair.
we will have to directly get back to them.
Why I'm saying that is to check the submission to see exactly if they had a definition there. Because the fact that they pointed this out must be significant. And then, so in their view, protective agriculture probably a broader, including these two aspects. And since we want to involve all workers, obviously for them, sheltered and greenhouse would be a subset of protected. And therefore, if you just keep shelter, you'd exclude others. That's just, I'm not trying to interpret why they would have included that. And therefore, this bill must seek to capture all workers. So I think before we make a decision, I think we need to just get some clarification. Yeah.
Chairman, I just Google protected agriculture. And hold on, coming from CARDI, the Caribbean Agriculture Research and Development Institute, their definition of protective agriculture, which is called PA, refers to the use of technology to modify the natural environment, temperature, rainfall, humidity, wind, etc., that surround a crop to harvest higher yields of better quality during an extended season. It's not necessarily greenhouse, it's beyond greenhouse.
So we will get back to that particular provision. We are checking the submission from RADA to see if they had given an explanation or a definition for protected agriculture. So we'll move on and get back to that. Yes. So move on, Mr. Mohan.
Right.
Appointed day.
Appointed day. AGC raised the comments. The definition of appointed day should be amended to correct the reference error. A reference should be made in the definition to section 2 instead of section 1. So this was considered by the Joint Select Committee in a meeting held on June 10, 2019. Please be reminded that the Ministry had recently communicated its shifting policy that the bill should come into effect on a phased basis.
Yes, so that is a position I believe the members have agreed to. Mr. Mohan? So you, Mrs. Seeley Brown, are you proposing that we modify the definition or we removed it absolutely?
If we're saying that we are going to use different days, I can't see why we would need to have the definition of appointed day. Because in subclause 2 of the bill, we would say that different days may be whatever for the year. So I don't think we will need that definition, if that is still the policy that we're going to go to different days.
Very well. Yes.
How do you treat Mrs. Seeley Brown?
Yes, Member Gale, yes.
Seeley Brown.
Mrs. Seeley Brown, this is specifically directed. Yes.
How would you treat that first initial date? If there was a retrospective effect for cause, say for instance, a business never implemented certain parts on that first day. Because you'd have to, what I'm trying to ascertain, if it's going to be done in phases, then you would have to have a first phase, that first day. And how would you record it in the legislation?
Could you use your mic, please?
So for instance, if the policy is that they are going to implement the administrative parts of the bill, at first, the order would say that part 2 of the whatever bill comes into effect as of what date. When they're ready now to implement the registration procedure, another order would be done to state, the date as to, when that part will come into effect. So every time there is need for implementing a particular part of the bill, the minister will have to do an order stating that this is done and that order is gazetted.
So there is no way, therefore, to commit to these phased dates. In other words, the administrative part by X date, the registration by X date. There's no way to commit that.
I mean, to the persons, you're speaking of to whom the bill would apply, like the establishments who would have to comply, that's what you're speaking about?
Well, you have two parts, either for those who have to comply or those who have to apply in terms of the order.
Well, I would think that the transitional provisions chair would have to provide for that. So when you deal with your transitional provisions, I guess we'll say on the commencement date or whatever, by within how much time before the commencement date or after, sorry, you have to do certain things, but your transitional provisions would have to speak to that, depending on which part of the bill you're going to bring in at that particular time.
What does clause 2 say in the new bill? Clause 2 is the appointed date.
Remember we had a long discussion about that the last time,
Yeah.
and we said that it's something that we're going to have to
Yes.
look at. So we've not been instructed as to how we are to draft clause 2, because remember you members had an issue as to when really should be the actual, was it a commencement day? There was some discussion here. So we haven't been instructed as to the policy in relation to clause 2 as yet, Chair.
So when we discuss in appointed day in clause 4, we are saying we don't know, we're agreeing that we're going phase.
Yes, and I think that is what is relevant at this time, Member Brown.
All right, so
Yes.
we'll have to come back to clause 2 to say this bill will come in different date. So, policy-wise, Chairman,
Yes.
this sound like we went past this bill, and I'm not sure we're going to get to an appointed date.
No, Member Brown, that's not my, no, it's more than this. I do not see that happening. What I do know is that on the recommendation of the Solicitor General and from the members here, that the policy as was originally presented by the ministry was revisited, and it was well accepted that a phased approach is best. I know in recent time there was a discussion in terms of how we intend to roll out, whether by sector or, and it was, an assurance was given by the ministry that not too long from now, the committee will be made aware as to how the ministry intends to roll out this phased implementation. No, man, it's weeks ago, just. Yes, Solicitor.
Thank you, Chairman. And I think the work of the ministry may not be that difficult, because throughout the bills, for instance, clause 40 talks about the appointed day when it comes on to registration of establishments, and said like you had a 90-day period after the appointed day. I think all the ministry will need to do is go through all the different places where it had this, where it was referencing, in a way, a staggered approach. They can identify those provisions and they can then work out how it would then impact the new clause 2. And then, of course, we'd have to then try to consider that review provision. Would it be the first commencement date, or, so you may still need a term like commencement date or appointed day, whichever, you may still need that term. Because you remember the review provision where that you were discussing, you didn't agree with my suggestion. But anyway, that has to be fixed to a particular date. And I think the members were of the view that it should be the first date. Right, so we may still need to have some sort of terminology to link to that first date. But just recently in the Parliament, the public bodies, the regulations under the PBMA Act has a sort of staggered approach as well, that I think you could, that could give you some kind of guide.
Chairman, I'm really seeking a policy response here, not a technical response. So what I want to get as a trade unionist, no, I'm not knocking the technical people, but as a trade unionist, a sense who's in the field, a sense as to when the workers of Jamaica could expect this bill to be on their side, when they could start electing the safety reps. And I'm trying to get a sense from the ministry as to when this may be. This is why I'm saying, just looking at the appointed date and the vagueness which will go forward is, what do I say to people? But you spend so much time down at Garden House discussing this thing. When, I mean, you can imagine I eat it, all of Anderson saying to me, so all the time I want to spend down there, when it going to start? What do I tell her? And she's afraid.
Yes, Mrs. Yes, Mr. Marcus.
Can we then say that the appointed day means the day appointed by the minister pursuant to section 2 for the coming into operation of any part of this act? Yeah, so whenever...
So it means the date.
Appointed by the minister, you could even say by order, because the subclause 2 would say that different days may be appointed for different parts of the act, right? So appointed by the minister by order, pursuant to section 2, for the coming into operation of any part of this act. So that will be the appointed day for that part, and then you, as Mrs. Aldred was saying, all those transitional provisions that you speak about on the appointed day would fit right into this definition. So once the day is appointed, the transitional provisions then begin to run.
I'm comfortable with that, you know.
Okay.
My question is, how long more must we wait for this bill?
Well, Member Brown, and I know it is my recollection that this is a point that Member Scurry raised not too long ago. And at the time, the ministry did indicate that we will come back to the committee. That is still the position. So I'll just ask that, you know, we allow the ministry to come back to the committee with that kind of information.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I want it to be said that we want to help the government to an achievement, because if you do that, you may not want to go dirty, as I'm seeing people promising to do. So we want to give you an achievement to boast on, to say we passed the Occupational Safety and Health Act, because I didn't like what I saw last night on TV. Because this country deserves a level of decency in our campaigning.
Yes,
that I didn't get a feeling. And I want to give you this law to say, I did this, and I will say, I like what you did.
As a committee, we have been very purposeful, Member Brown, and we have to keep our work in that regard. We have been. Yes, so the suggestion as put forward by Mrs. Seeley Brown, members, do we agree to take that on board? Ministry, any comment in that regard?
Yes, Chair, we can take it on board.
Yes, very well.
We have no objections.
So we agree to the amendment of that clause as put forward. That the appointed day, Mrs. Seeley Brown, you could help me. The appointed day means the day appointed by the minister by order pursuant to section 2 for the coming into operation of any part of this act.
Chair. Yeah. Subclause 2 then we would amend that using that standard clause that we use when we are bringing the bill into effecting stage.
Very well. So we have that, members. Biological agent, may we move on?
This was coming from the JCTU. Biological agents to be redefined to include protozoa. The ministry's response: the definition of biological agents in this clause is not intended to be exhaustive, as the second schedule gives a comprehensive list of occupational illnesses and the biological agents that lead to them. Although protozoa is not mentioned, paragraph 1.3.9 of the second schedule makes provisions for hazardous biological agents that are not expressly stated in the bill. It reads, diseases caused by other biological agents at work not mentioned in the preceding items where a direct link is established scientifically or determined by methods appropriate to national conditions and practice between the exposure to these biological agents arising from work activities and the diseases contracted by the workers. This captures the full gamut of biological agents, Not only protozoa, but any other that we cannot exhaustively list.
Yes, Member Longmore.
No, I'm in agreement with that.
Okay.
Yeah, you
Mrs.
can't just
Seeley?
limit it to protozoa. It's an exhaustive list.
Mrs. Seeley Brown, any comments?
Where this definition links it to the second schedule, Chair. Normally, and then we use in means, so we have to be careful. If it's a case where the list, what we're saying here is not exhaustive and it includes other things that are supposed to be in the second schedule, why aren't we referring to the second schedule here? I'm checking to see. Did we link this? I'm not seeing where, Chair, we have linked. Okay, it speaks to section 4. Yes, is it that we need to link? Isn't it that we need to say something, Mr. Mohan, that refers the definition to the second schedule?
Yes, we can do so.
Yeah. But hold on. But is it the correct second schedule? That's the one that deals with occupational diseases?
Yes.
No, well then that.
The second schedule.
Are you sure that's the correct schedule? Right, but we're speaking here of biological agents and what's that? 1.3?
If you look at 1.3,
I've seen it here. But you see, when you look at, no, yes.
I think she's searching for a link between biological agents and occupational diseases, which may be in the body of the act, Mr.
No,
Mohan.
Yes.
It appears that it may not be the entire second schedule.
It's just,
It may be parts of the second schedule. For instance, it may be all of what you see in 1.3. It could be some other things as well.
No, but it's not linked in that way, no, Mrs. Aldred. What, so I think I see the point that on the question that is asked, because it says biological agents and infectious or parasitic diseases. Now, when you look at the term biological agents and you look at the definition, it means that it doesn't tell me that it needs to go beyond what is here. You understand? Because it's.
Is it a question of?
It's not clear.
Labeling of the second schedule?
Sorry.
Is it an issue of labeling of the second schedule?
No, because you see, Member Brown, the second schedule speaks of a list of occupational diseases, right?
Yeah, correct.
And in 1.3, it speaks to biological agents and infectious or parasitic diseases. And then you define, yes. And then you define it to mean these things there. So it's not clear that it is linked to the second schedule.
So I'm asking again, is it a question of the labeling of the second schedule?
Well, that's why.
If we include, sorry, go ahead.
That's why I was asking if we were actually using the correct schedule, because it is.
Yeah, but that's where it is. So avoiding the form, putting the substance. The substance is there about biological agent. So if we label it list of occupational disease, biological agents, etc.
It's wider.
No, so I think the ministry needs to come back to indicate whether or not, because it's simple. If we know what the intention is, then it can be easily effected. But I don't know that the definition of biological agents was to be linked to all the chemical agents listed in 1.1, for instance, although I know it says diseases caused by, but you have a list of chemical agents in 1.1. Did you mean to link it, or did you only mean to refer to those things that are in 1.3? And if you did, then maybe you pull out what's in 1.3 and treat with it discreetly. But the ministry would have to give instructions on that.
1.3, it speaks to biological agents, infectious and parasitic disease. What's the point you're making, that we could separate that out?
That's what we would need, the instructions. But to me, it appears as if that is where the link would be with what's listed in, well, most of 1.3, because then the last part of 1.3 speaks of the disease. Because remember, the second schedule also has another purpose, which is the list of occupational diseases caused by different things, including biological agents. So if we're now linking, so it's two different concepts. One, to talk about the actual biological agents. The second thing is actually to deal with the diseases caused by a number of things, including biological agents. So I don't think it's a good fit to merge everything in one. I would suggest it would be better to split them out. But then, of course, the ministry needs to give some kind of guidance and from you know, technical experts in the area.
Yes, I was going to add that, that I think that there should be some input from the Ministry of Health on this one. Because you see, you also have to protect for what we don't know yet. And there are many agents that are evolving, that are being used, and technology can expose us to, not to mention the non-physical forms of hazard.
But we're dealing with biological agents, so we're not dealing with physical agents or chemical agents. We're dealing with specifically with biological agents. Yes.
But you can have some biological agents that are physical and vice versa. So that's why I'm saying that you might want to get some guidance from someone in infectious diseases and such, who is much more au fait with what may be the more current definitions that are used.
Yes, Mrs. Seeley.
I'm seeing where it is also used in the CARICOM draft, defined in the same way, but it's not linked to a schedule. It is just used, it's just defined. Yes, and in the draft, yes, and the precedent that the bill is taken from, it's not defined in that bill at all. So
well, sure. I think all that the JCTO was putting forward is that when you look at the biological agents that are listed here, it seems as if that protozoa is to be included. So that is really what is before us. Yes. But yes, Mr. Simmons.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I was just saying that in the draft bill that we have, biological agents was not specifically linked to the second schedule. I think it was just done in the explanation by the ministry.
Yes.
It appeared to me that we're not opposing connecting the 1.3 in the schedule, second schedule, into our definition of biological agent. It appeared to me we're agreeing on that. I don't have a problem if that's what we're doing. And maybe just in light of what I think Senator Longmore said, again, and any other biological agent which may arise from, you say no, Mr. Seeley Brown? You see, I in the age in which I live, things may come that is not stated in the legislation, and the other branch will say, if the Parliament had intended that, they would have stated it. So I would like the catch-all in these cases where we protect, right?
Well, Mrs. Seeley Brown, you're the drafter, so you could. Yes. Yes.
No, I'm saying I'm not sure that I'm agreeing with what Member Brown is saying in relation to a scientific definition, but I would yield to the technical experts to tell us.
I'm going to give a practical example of what the unknown, and when you're talking about biological manifestations, I've come across this thing that I have never seen, never knew existed. This is a picture that I took a screenshot of a leaf sheep. This is an actual animal that is capable of photosynthesis. An animal. something that we have never, this is something newly discovered. Exactly, exactly. And here's an animal that has chlorophyll. So I'm just showing you the extent of the, see there? It's showing you the extent of biological manifestations that we don't know about.
All right, Ministry, let us hear from you in this regard, and as we proceed. Yes.
Well, we will begin
All right, Mr.
by...
Mon, let me hear from Member Gale, and then you'll have your final say on this point as we move on. Yes.
I was talking about moving on, but for efficiency purpose, because we're dealing with the definitions now, are we going to come back to some of these definitions that we have passed? Why not just deal with them now? I know we're dealing with the stakeholders' comments, you know.
Yes, we deal with the definition, clause section 4, to include everybody's comments.
No,
Legal-
no,
Yes.
outside of just dealing with everybody's comments.
Yes.
There are some that I just want to be sure that we are satisfied in dealing with, that we would have passed. With
Yes.
the, I mean, apprentice, aquaculture, if we're okay with that, we don't need to come back to them.
That's the point.
That's it.
So
Okay.
that's the point, yes. So it's only the ones that we need like some technical guidance on.
Okay.
Those are the ones that we'll revert to. Yes, member Gail. But Mr. Mahan, proceed.
So just to say that we will be guided by Ms. Seeley Brown, but we were trying to fill that gap in 1.3.9 because we recognize that there may be other biological agents that may come into play that, you know, we would not have expressly listed here.
Including any other biological agents listed in paragraph 1.3 of the schedule. That's what you.
Why not include protozoa?
Would that
Why we
assist?
just don't include it?
What's that, Chair?
Wondering why do we not just include protozoa and any other biological agents as listed in schedule 1.3.9?
I think that would. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so we do that then, Chair.
May satisfy the country, but I'm not.
Yes.
In this world, I want to see protection, because as I said, when it goes to the next branch of government, it is what we passed, and we have a chance to pass something which takes into account that other things may develop.
That is giving you what you want, what you have asked for in a minute.
You are agreeing to that?
That general catch-all.
All right, cool.
Yes.
I'm comfortable. I didn't understand that.
Yes. So, so let us hear, Mrs. Seeley Brown, yes.
Sorry. We include, Chair, the term protozoa and any other biological agents listed in part 1.3 of the second schedule. Is that the correct reference? Yes. Bearing in mind that the schedule may change, Chair. Yeah.
Mr. Chair, can we let us accept the definition put forward by CPC, but with a question mark, because these things listed here may well already be included in section 4.
What he's saying, Chair, is what is in 1.3 may already be included in bacteria, viruses, fungi, whatever. So we may not need to do that. So let's just get the technical guidance on it, and then we may be able to leave out the listed in 1.3 of the schedule. I accept that. Yes.
Very well. So we will revert to that, Member Brown. We proceed now, Mr. Mahan.
Branches of economic activity. AGC comments. Paragraph C of the definition of branches of economic activity provides for a memorandum of understanding between the director and the relevant entity. The director is defined to mean the director of occupational safety and health appointed under section 132. Clause 132 of the bill makes it clear that the director is a civil servant. The director therefore has no legal personality except if the director acts in his or her own personal capacity. The director is therefore not able to, under law, enter into a memorandum of understanding. Paragraph C of the definition of branches of economic activity has to be reformulated. So the definition of the term from the ministry, branches of economic activity, is to be deleted from the bill. As the MLSS had communicated in the Joint Select Committee meeting held on November 18, 2019, we concur that the use of this term is not consistent with the language of the bill. The term workplace is preferable. And as you're aware, with the policy shift, it will no longer be the director. That's how it is set out here. So I guess that will be a change in terms of the drafting.
Is that clear, members? Mrs. Seeley Brown, any comments? What is before us is that branches of economic activity is to be deleted from the bill, and the use of the word workplace be substituted therefore, which of course is defined further in section 4, yes. Yes, so for the avoidance of using several terms having the same meaning, just to be standard in language. We agree, members?
Just yes. Clarification, does it exclude anywhere?
Well, the definition of workplace is broad, but I'll hear from Mr. Mahan. Yes. We hear from Mrs. Seeley Brown, then we come to you, Mr. Mahan.
When we look at clause 8, we are clear in our minds that it includes the public service. I'm happy with that because I'm looking at the definition. I hear the point that we haven't really been using the term branches of economic activity. We've been using workplace. But when I see the way it's defined in the CARICOM draft, which I quite like, branches of economic activity means all branches in which workers are employed, including the public service. But since we have introduced this term of workplace, I just want us to be clear, Chair, that when we look at clause 8 and the definition of workplace, it includes the public service.
Do I hear a proposal? Do I hear a proposal? Sorry, you're not finished.
No, well, I kind of had some, I don't know, I'm not so sure that I was liking the definition of workplace, the way it's set out here. I can't say that I have a solution to it right now, but I just want to ensure if we're taking out branches of economic activity, if we're going to use workplace, it's clear that it includes the public service. Yeah, the
Chairman,
very well, yes.
Whatever we do, there needs to be, as Mr. Seeley Brown said, a guarantee that workplace means every and single place. Maybe the solution is not just to delete branches of economic activity, but to include some of the things therein under it, which deals with workplace. For example, we're clear that this act binds the Crown, and the Crown falls under it, including this public service. But under biological agent at C, it speaks to, in accordance with the MOU between the director and the relevant entity under the Act with the approval of the Minister, the economic activities provided for in the first schedule. What happened to the first schedule if we remove the definition here? So that goes, does the first schedule go, or do we incorporate the first schedule under it? I think that's important for us to resolve.
Yeah, Mrs. Bennett Campbell, please respond
We
to
had done functions of the authority. We had given the authority the power to actually enter into MOUs with other entities that have jurisdiction for safety and health. We may not be retaining the first schedule in terms of the listener legislation, and if we are doing it, we have to do it in a different way. Because right now, everybody came and they were confused about the term branches of economic activity. From Ministry of Education, everybody was confused. And it was only being really linked to that first schedule.
In respect of the definition of workplace, You have heard the concerns. Members are querying whether or not it is broad enough. So please comment on that.
It is extremely wide, so let me just turn to it, because the committee already looked at this and the Surgeon had made a change. A workplace is a place where work is carried out for a business or undertaking, and a worker needs to be, is likely to be, or to go by reason of his work, and which is under the direct or indirect control of the PCBU. And the Surgeon had suggested that we took out 2 some time ago. So it's in the widest sense of what a workplace is.
My concern again, Chairman,
Yes,
is about, do we take B and C from branches of economic activity into clause 8, meaning of workplace?
Okay.
Mr. Simmons is just reminding me, Chair, that we actually have a provision which says the Act binds the Crown, so I'm happy.
So that's good enough?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
yes.
Member Brown, are you satisfied with that? There's already in the main text a clause that says the Act binds the Crown, and that should cover the concern in terms of
No, that clause is there. I'm
Yes.
not sure if in my mind it does what we want it to do, and repetition may be necessary.
Mrs. Seeley Brown, you will just, Member Brown is seeking some assistance. Yes.
Mrs. Aldred spoke to it last week, or week before, Chair, and how when you have provisions in legislation which says that, and the case law which follows, it really means that it binds the Crown. So I'm saying if we going to use that provision, I really and truly, I'm taking back what I said about the whole thing of workplace, because then it would include the public service.
Very well.
I would just want Mrs. Bennett Campbell to just repeat the definition for workplace, if it included where the worker ought to be.
Yes.
It did.
There needs to be, is likely to be, or to go by reason of his work. To be is likely to be.
Public or private?
It's not a problem.
Public or private sector.
But the drafters are saying, Member Brown, that you know.
What I wanted in my mind to be captured is that in order to do your work, sometimes you have to commute from point A to point B, which is very critical in the scheme of things. So the 2 is important. Yeah, or to go.
All right, so we are agreeing to the removal of the term branches of economic activity. Members? Yes, proceed, Mr. Mahan. Building?
Building.
There yet, but you can proceed.
Yes.
Building Legal Reform Department's comment. Building, this definition needs clarity. What is a domestic building or building of a warehouse class? The Ministry's response. The definition of building was adopted in verbatim from the Building Act 2018. We will be guided by the OPC as to whether the terms domestic building and building of a warehouse class should be adopted from the Building Act, since they are not used in a substantive bill.
The problem is that in the building...
Use the mic, Mrs. Seeley Brown.
I'm saying if it comes from somewhere, Chair, and I don't know if we can change it here in this act.
Very well.
May I come in?
Mrs. Bennett Campbell.
I think the challenge that was being raised is that the words domestic building and building of a warehouse class are used. I think that's what LRD was saying. In the Building Act, in addition to defining building, they defined domestic building and building of a warehouse class.
But then you have to define them here. You have to define
So that
them
means
here.
it has to.
Yes.
I think that was the problem.
Yes.
Those definitions were not carried over.
Or you say it has a meaning assigned to it in the Building Act.
What are you proposing,
Just
Mrs.
say,
Seeley
just say
Brown?
it has a meaning assigned to it in the Building Act, Chair. Building has a meaning assigned to it in the Building Act.
Okay,
Yes.
very well. Members? So the definition of building is building as defined in the Building Act 2018.
Chair, to add, also
Yes.
the reference to section 2 should be changed to section 3.
Okay. Well, you're
Where's
at
that, Chair? Where's that section?
charitable purpose? Oh, he has moved on, apparently.
Sorry, that
Yes.
was an error.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Mr. Simmons.
Just following on the point made by Ms. Seeley Brown, I actually think it would be best to reproduce the definition in this bill based on what was done previously, because there are numerous references earlier. A decision was taken to take them out and just reproduce them in this bill.
So the suggestion is,
Instead of
Mr.
saying with reference to the Building Act, just simply put the definition in this bill.
Okay, fine.
But Mrs. Bennett can be saying there are more than one definition that's just linked to the definition. No, two more plus two. Yeah, so what you say is that you want all reproduced in here? Yeah, those two. Peter, difficult bad enough.
So the drafters will resolve that, I gather. So we move on to charitable purpose.
All right, charitable purpose, we are recommending that the reference to section 2 should be changed to section 3.
Yes. Members, we agree. Move on.
Child, Legal Reform Department's comments. Child, this term appears at paragraph 5 of the 9th schedule alone. There is no substantive provision in the bill dealing with children. The necessity for this definition is therefore not apparent from the bill. So the ministry concurs that the word child is only used in the 9th schedule on a regulation making power, and that there is no substantial provision in the bill addressing children specifically. We therefore do not oppose the deletion of this term.
Mrs. Benny Campbell, let us hear you on this.
Yes. All right, when we looked back, because if you look at the 9th schedule, 1 second. Elimination of child labor, including the worst forms. Ministry of Education had raised a concern, which really is that this is addressed really under the Child Care and Protection Act. Now I know the problem is that the ministry, there's a list of light work that is supposed to be actually created, which the Minister of Labor has jurisdiction to do under that legislation. I know the ministry was trying to do it under the regulations here, but looking back at the Child Care and Protection Act, section 34 to be specific, the minister's jurisdiction to the Minister of Labor. So it's shared with Education and Labor, but that section belongs to the Minister of Labor in terms of jurisdiction. That schedule, that light work has to come under the Child Care and Protection Act. That is where the mandate is. So if we're doing anything in relation to children, it must be in relation to the safety and health component, but we cannot step into the jurisdiction of the Child Care and Protection Act. So we have to be careful how we approach it. If it is that we are doing anything in regulations, then we would liaise with the Ministry of Education in relation to child labor, but it really is the remit of the Child Care and Protection Act.
Yes, Member Gill.
So my purpose, when you can, not now, not detaining you, but I'm trying to find it, the definition for apprentice under the Apprenticeship Act. Because I'd want to be clear in terms of what definition is being used, since you're seeking, on the other hand, to delete the whole aspect of child labor, and there's no commingling whatsoever.
And just to point out, the Apprenticeship Act was repealed. It was repealed with remember the amendment to the Heart Trust NTA.
Right.
So it's actually, you would have to refer to the new act.
New act. Yes, good. Yes, Mrs. Bennett Campbell. You have heard the comments. Do you have any?
Before Mrs. Bennett
Yes.
Campbell come in, is the ministry telling us that we're building an Occupational Safety and Health Act without dealing with child labor and having regard for the convention that we're all part of, dealing with the worst forms of child labor? Because I don't think it's incompatible with light work. But I can't see us not addressing child labor.
What I'm saying is that in terms of how we treat with child labor, we have to liaise with the Ministry of Education. This term is not used. It was really in relation to regulation making powers. So the term itself is not used in substantive provision of this bill, which is why I was taking it out. If we do have in layers, we decide to do some regulations that we can do under OSHA, and the term is relevant then we put it in regulations, having layers with the Ministry of Education so that we're not duplicating our efforts.
My question is, I'm not so sure I get the answer. You're saying we're keeping child labor, we're just going to do it through regulations and not in the bill itself?
No, I said what I am saying is that we're going to liaise with the Ministry of Education in terms of what they are dealing with and what we are addressing in relation to child labor. So I do not need to define child labor in the substantive bill because the term is not used. And also, Ministry of Education has a problem with the definition that we have. So we would really have to work with them to tailor a definition for the regulations when we have liaised with them as to what they are doing and what we're doing. In relation to light work, the Minister of Labor has the jurisdiction under Section 34 of that Act to declare light work. So we would use that part to declare what is light work as required under that Act.
When I was growing up, before I reached the age I'm at, the Ministry of Labor had responsibility for child labor. You're saying that has gone now to education?
I'm saying so of the jurisdiction of the Ministry of Labor, the minister is under the Child Care and Protection Act in relation to the child labor component. So what we were seeking to do in relation to this, we have to look at it carefully because some of the things can only be done by the Minister of Labor under the Child Care and Protection Act in relation to the light work.
May it contravene the ILO convention? I want clarity on that.
Yes, Mrs. Bennett Campbell, the question is specifically for you. Yes.
So busy doing.
I have received the guidance that we can do it here and consult with the Ministry of Education. But we'd have to be careful though, the child labor itself is not used in the regulating making power. So we'd have to look at it to see how we're going to work it in.
So again, I'm just trying to be clear. We can, you're saying, use regulation to deal with it. But
that is the guidance I just received. But we will look specifically, when we come back to regulating making powers, to precisely what we want to do in relation to the regulation making powers. It's not as precise as it should be.
So
But in any event, so we can look at the definition of child labor then, in case the rewording of the regulations mean making power means that the term is there.
I hate to say it, but because I was there in the palace when child labor was being discussed over several years. I want to make sure that our Occupational Safety and Health Act has a component that deals with child labor. And so you're going to put in, but you're going to limit it to regulations. I'm just trying to get a sense of where you're going.
Just a little clarification here. Is there reference to within, as you have it now, within this bill to the Child Care and Protection Act?
No.
I think that is what we're seeking. Because I think what we're trying to ensure is that child labor, and I know that within the Child Care and Protection Act it is addressed extensively.
Page 133.
It is?
First schedule, the Child Care and Protection Act. That's going to come out.
Actually, it's here.
The first schedule is
It says it right here.
The first schedule.
Probably to be
Look at the first schedule, but it doesn't
amendment to
make
the
sense.
CCPA.
Mr. Chair,
Right.
for me.
It does say, it does.
My understanding of what I'm getting from the Ministry of Labour is that that the Minister of Labour has a remit under the Child Care and Protection Act. I think if you're going to make regulations for light work, and the power is on, that is probably defined under the Child Care Protection Act. But if you're going to make regulations there, the Minister of Labour will have to make regulations pursuant to the Child Care and Protection Act. If you're going to do it in the OSH Act, some substantive provision will have to be placed in this Act to make the regulations here. So the point the LRD was making is that it appears in the regulation making power, but there's nothing in the bill to support those regulations. So that's what, so they can make a decision whether they're going to do it on the Child Care Protection Act or here and simply decide.
You have heard Mr. Simmons, Mrs. Bennett Campbell. Any further comment?
Well, as I said, there may be components of safety and health in relation to children that we could ground in this legislation. So we would prefer to look back at that matter in terms of, because there are other legislation, OSHA legislation that deal with children specifically in relation to safety and health. So we could look back at that. It's wider than the light work issue.
Okay. So, yes. Mrs. Cuthbert, yes. All right, so before us, so Ministry, are you saying that are you still proposing the deletion of the words child and child labor, or?
We'll revert. Let us look back at
very well. By virtue of the discussions, the Ministry will come back on these two provisions. So let's move on to commuting accident. Yes, Sergeant.
So on the point of apprentice, the use of the term apprentice, so with the repeal of the Apprenticeship Act, the Heart Trust NTA doesn't use the term apprentice, talks about trainee.
Very well. Yes. Very well. Duly noted. Yes. Duly noted. So we move on, Mr. Mahon.
Commuting accident comments from the OPAC. In the definition of commuting accident, kindly clarify what constitutes an accident occurring on the direct way in either direction between the place of work or work-related training or the other work-related activity. How is this to be determined? Paragraphs A, B, and C are too wide. Terms such as principal or secondary residence require a definition if it is to be used in order to provide clarity. So the Ministry's response, the definition of commuting accident contained in the ILO Protocol of 2002 to the Occupational Safety and Health Convention 1981, Protocol 155, and the Code of Practice on Recording and Notification were used as guides to formulate this definition. However, based on the concern raised, the following proposal is made. Delete the words occurring on the direct way in either direction. At subparagraph A, delete the words principal or secondary and replace with place of. However, please note that the definition as obtained in the bill is similar to that recommended in the CARICOM model law.
Yes, Ms.
I don't think just if we have to find some other words to use, because if we leave it as is, it is too wide. So if we're going to delete, it has to be linked to your journey to and from work. I get that, but if we just delete these words without more, I think the definition will be too wide. Because I can have an accident between.
What is proposed here, or what is stated here, is that the current definition, as is Mr. Mahon, is similar to that in the CARICOM model law. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
Okay. Even before these deletions as recommended. Well, however, please
It is
note,
also in the Code of Practice on Record and Notification of Accidents.
Chairman,
yes,
while
Mr.
we
Brown.
look at whether it's in the protocol from the ILO or the Caribbean model thing, I'm reading this to be a policy decision that the worker going home in a bus from Hotel A after the whatever hour shift meets in an accident, that accident will be covered as a commuting accident, even though not called an occupational accident. So I just want to make sure that that's where the policy is going. And if you think back on what the doctors, Senator more not here, what the doctors were saying on all angles, that coming from work after how many hours beyond 12 hours, and they fall asleep and they crash and all of that, those were now covering. Those type of accidents were covering. That's what I want to be clear on.
Member Gill?
Chairman,
Yes.
you know, the scope of this legislation provides that the employer at all times in the protection of the employees have a duty of care. And I have some members in the tourism industry where in order to get them to come to work, they are picked up at a particular location. And when they finish work, they are transported to that location. In my mind, that is commuting. And I want to be satisfied that the scope of this legislation is seeking to even protect them in terms of who is hired to transport them, and that driver at all times is at least following the road code. And so there has to be a correlation in terms of the protection of those workers who, by virtue of their work, they are being picked up and dropped off at the workplace. And I'd want to be sure that in this definition, it is taking that into consideration.
Member,
Yes.
do you think that the definition, when you look at paragraph B and C, that definition is, it's not just wide, but it's really ambiguous. The place where the worker usually takes a meal or where the worker usually receives his remuneration, that's very wide, you know. So if I leave, no, think about it. If I leave now and I say I'm going to the bank and I tell me if this is the intent, if this is the intention, and I meet an accident between here and the bank, what you're saying is that the employee is liable? It's a commuting accident? Is that the intention? Is that because you know I'm asking? I'm not seeing this definition in any of the bills that we've looked at, even the precedent that was used to draft this bill. So I am just trying in my mind to figure out why would we want to define it, and if we define it, why are we defining it so widely? Where you take your meal? I'm not sure.
So
Yes.
your, Mrs. Seeley Brown, the extension of your argument is a little different from what I was advancing. However, I'm directed to also look at that. And I did form the opinion then that during the course of your work time for the day, you'd have to go for lunch, and that's the 1 hour that we're speaking about. And I don't know if the ministry was seeking to absorb in the mind of the employer the protection when they go, if they have to go down the road for lunch, and also if they have to go to the bank when the days that you have them get a check and have to go and cash it. And I was asking in my mind the question about the worker's principal or secondary residence. What the ministry meant by that. If you live two places and you go one tonight, or you go another one tomorrow night,
They're proposing to
or
delete
one is for during the week, or one is for weekends.
I mean, like, if you have there, you have accommodation where you.
Or
so
that
has to
would
be
have been
defined.
if there's accommodation
Right,
to
but it
which
has to
is
be clear
being
of.
provided.
Yes.
But it wasn't clear in my
Yes,
mind.
Yes. And why do we need to define it? That's the whole thing, Chair. Do we need to define? Is it helpful for us to define this term? We need to first see how it's used in the bill, and whether or not we really need to, because it's very ambiguous, and we can have some legal challenges even in interpreting this provision, Chair.
In my mind, Chair, this commuting accident, in my mind, it meant, without looking at the definition, it meant that in carrying out your duty or in your commuting to and from work, if you had met in an accident.
I see Joshua has made a very interesting comment on page 7 of the yes.
In my mind, correct me if I'm wrong, it has to be grounded in something else, like you have overworked, you've worked beyond.
Yes.
It can't just be a commuting accident without
Yes.
more.
In
It
other
has to
words,
be
it can't
grounded in
stand,
something
it
else.
should
can't
look at
stand on
Joshua's
its own.
comments.
It cannot stand on its
On page
own.
7.
It cannot stand on its own to suggest that
Yes.
it's an everyday activity.
Well, the comment,
But I wanted to be sure that we're dealing with, in the first instance, those whose the employer has an obligation to transport the worker in carrying out their duties. And that is not,
yes.
that is not being suggested here.
The comments from Joshua on page 7, I think 7, at the top of page 7. Joshua, same thing. Yes, remember they're talking about commuting accident versus, yes, occupational. Mr. Mohan, you have heard the deliberations?
Right. So just so for the purposes of understanding, the ILO protocol that speaks to occupational safety and health, the P155 protocol for the Occupational Safety and Health Convention, Article 1, in the definition, defines commuting accident, covers an accident resulting in death or personal injury occurring on a direct way between the place of work and the worker's principal or secondary residence, or the place where the worker usually takes a meal, etc., as all we have in the bill. So as Member Gale was speaking about primary and secondary residence, if you have situations like in government where you have a traveling officer going out in the field to do work, he may stay overnight for a couple of days, that could be considered as a secondary place of residence, right?
I don't believe that Clause A speaks to that. When I look at it, it's not coming out in that way to me, clearly understood, in terms of the worker's principal or secondary residence.
Right,
Unless you want to determine the definition for residence.
Chairman.
But I can understand the need to squarely protect an employee if you are sent to Montego Bay to do an investigation and it requires you to overnight, right? I can understand that they have to put you up somewhere that is safe and your mode of transporting is also safe. But this is not what this is saying, in my mind.
Member Brown?
Yeah, I want to do it in stages first. Just we are committed to commuting accidents. If we are, then we can then determine what constitutes that. I can see scenario, for example, in the sugar industry. People working on estate X, but the office is in, say, Clarkstown or Lioneltown or Frome. Yeah, right? I can see that. I can see in the backside, for example. People are assigned, say, Water Valley. You know that place well, right? But they have to go up to near the border with Trelawney. So, you know, where they are allowed some mining in that area. But they have to be transported. That's a commutable accident if something happened there. And they may be doing it in vehicles that are not licensed for the road because those places are not even public. So first I want to say we're committed to commuting accidents. Then we can define it beyond commuting, whether or not it is from home to work, place, or workplaces, because the workplace may differ from, depending on what assignment you get each day. Right? So let's say I work at a telecommunication company. Cop driving the vehicle, he's allowed to keep the vehicle overnight. Driving from there to an assignment, say from in pastures, and meeting an accident. Does commuting accident cover those scenarios? And I think it should. I think it should. So, and I've always, Chairman, people are going to work on buses and they crash and nobody takes responsibility because you wasn't at work. I am reading this legislation to be attempting to cover and protect such employees. And if that is so, I can then say, let the drafters fit in those scenarios and to cover those scenarios. But I am for commuting accident.
Member Brown, my only concern though is that what if while on your way to work, the worker is engaged or is involved in an accident while traveling in a vehicle that was not, quote unquote, a company's vehicle, and that accident was squarely due to the negligence of somebody else, a third party, who wasn't the driver of the vehicle that the worker was traveling in?
It will appear to me that the road traffic arrangements that exist now would deal with some of that. The issue is, does the employer of the worker driving from Linstead to Discovery Bay, for example, which happens every day, or from Falmouth to Discovery Bay, meeting an accident, is there any provision for protecting that? That worker, for example, may have exhausted his leave, his sick leave or so. That worker now is out. But for collective bargaining, because I know of cases where collective bargaining has protected that worker. But like the overwhelming majority of the workers of Jamaica are not in collective bargaining arrangement. So what protection for them? So I understand you're in other words, who gets sue, but what protection is there for that person who gets injured going to work?
Perhaps the ministry could assist us in terms of, yes.
I'm noticing, Chair, when we use it in the legislation, It's only for statistical and
Where, with what
It's,
clause?
it's
Because I think that is where we need to go.
133, 3G. 3G, and it speaks to a fourth schedule. So I don't think we need to.
Yes. Page 92, yes. So this is the context in which the term is used in the Act, and certainly not in the manner that I believe Member Brown was conveying, yes. So Member Brown, I don't know if you have looked at it yet. 93, page 92, at the top, G.
That's exactly my point. I'm trying to understand, because are we then trying to cover everybody who may have an accident going to their place of work, leaving their house, and possibly, you know, wasn't paying attention on their phone and meeting an accident and something happens? The workplace would then be responsible. Is that what because that is very broad, and I think we'll get in trouble. I would not agree. I don't think I'd be in any agreement with anything like that.
You're knowing
However, if it is that, say for example, MOH, they go and they have a bus and they're picking up persons, they would go to your resident to take you to work, and that transportation is in some sort of an accident, then I think then you should be protected. If it's a company going to then get you in a company vehicle, I think that is the only time one should be protected under this.
It's not even used in those situations. What this is just saying is that one of the functions of the director will be to publish notifications and statistics on how many of these accidents occurred. So I don't even think we need to define it here. They can determine when they're doing their statistics, what are we going to use as a reference for commuting accident, and not define it the way we've defined it in the bill here.
I can understand what the objectives based on just gathering data. But there's also a fundamental problem in terms of protecting those who, in the carrying out their duties, you would have to, there's a need to protect them. And that's my concern. But then I will take up that concern though. The fact that it becomes part of this discussion is just for us to identify where it is being dealt with, because it would be cause for concern, and it would be, in my mind, impracticable for us to go through a legislation of this extent and make no provision in the legislation for that regard. But Mr. Mahan, you may know very well where it is.
Yes, you could use your mic, yes.
Note that concern for now. Agree to delete this and move on, Chair.
Yes.
Just note the concern.
Mr. Mahan, yes.
Well, I was just going to make reference to the ILO Code of Practice to read to bring some clarity based on the discussions. Would you still want me to proceed, Chair?
Yes, the members.
Okay. So if you
before you go do that, just agree that you would have noted the concern that I have raised.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, we have noted the concerns. Some of the experts who met in putting this code of practice together, paragraph 14 says, the role of social security institutions in the field of prevention of occupational accidents and diseases was highlighted by the experts. Work in this area also strove to encourage governments to harmonize statistical systems and definitions for non-occupational accidents, such as traffic, home and leisure accidents, in order to allow for an improved use of statistical data for prevention purposes, which was particularly useful in the prevention of commuting accidents which were not under the control of the employer. So the intent was not really to be looking at liability. It is really in terms of whatsoever interventions that can be done based on the statistics, because it has been recognized, and if you were to read paragraph 13, commuting accidents cause severe economic losses to the enterprise and deserve attention. So even going a little bit further as well, when we're looking at working hours, because it has been accepted as a standard that when persons work for long, inordinate hours, then their attention span may go. So even though they have completed work, you do a 15, 16-hour shift, and you're leaving to go home, then you can be in an accident. It is not an occupational accident, but it's really a commuting accident. So based on the statistics, you can know what interventions that as a workplace you may need to put in place. Maybe in those scenarios you have to get a bus, as you said, to carry the persons home and pick them up and bring them back to work. But in terms of any liability, you know, the buses, insurance and all of that would have covered if there's any accident along traversing from home to work and so forth. So it's really to get the statistics, as Ms. Seeley Brown is saying, and to use that statistics as a means of progressively looking at what interventions can be done.
Chairman, what's the purpose of collecting statistics only? To say so X amount recovered? I want protection for the workers who are oftentimes traveling in, if you're limited to traveling in company sponsored or company owned vehicles.
Well, I think Member Brown,
but all I'm saying is that if the purpose of putting commuting accident there is a purpose of gathering data, it makes no sense. We need protection for workers. And that's why we need to put in something in the bill that protect workers in those situations.
The issue, Member Brown, is whether the commuting accident is an occupational accident.
No, it's kind of clear. The ILO separate them.
Yes.
I am, and Joshua asked for separation. I don't mind separating them. My concern is this. Worker on the North Coast, so we see it so often, coming from the hotel at 11 o'clock in the night or whatever, or later, runs in the back of a truck. Oh, is there any liability that goes? We have seen cases where vehicle turnover, tractor vehicles, right? You have a nice spot that I like in St. Elizabeth. They carry people on a jitney up to that little piece of paradise. I don't live there, but the driver works there. The driver who drives the jitney works there, but I like it. Yeah, it's why it's false. It's just a beautiful piece of paradise. Do we protect? Is that, well, that is not commuting.
Chairman,
because that is at work.
Yes.
But the issue is the protection of those workers who are going to work and coming from work in company-related things. It can't be just
Chairman, I'm picking up that there is another issue that we may need to address first before this is clarified. And is it then that we are now seeking for employment agencies, not employment, for employers to provide by law transportation of workers? Is it via industries? Is it via specific work circumstances? I think it's a real can of worms that we're you know, kind of playing with. Now, I definitely agree with Member Brown's fervor to protect the workers, and I share in that. But are we overextending that protection? And if we are to provide for the persons who, like you described, who are on their way home late at night because of working a double shift, etc., and because of the consequences maybe of the mental fatigue from working the double shift, they meet into an accident. There should be some provision for that. So maybe we need to recognize where there are differences in the legislation that may apply and not do a carte blanche, one rule serves all situation, because I think there is more than what is apparent that is being discussed.
Celia Brown, you had a comment? Yes.
Just to repeat what I said, it's basically for statistical purposes here.
Yes.
I'm sure in all of the provisions which deals with primary duty of care,
Yes.
what we are seeking, what we are concerned about is addressed there. We can look at it when we get back to it again. So I'm still going to suggest, Chair, that we just delete it from the definition section
Yes.
and see how it's dealt with. The concerns raised by members, which has nothing to do with its defined here, see how it's dealt with in the legislation when we're going.
Chairman, Friday I spent time fasting in another country's courts. They were live streaming an event
That's a Privy Council?
from Ghana.
Okay.
Their Supreme Court was live streaming the
Electoral.
issue around electoral thing.
Yes.
And one attorney said, boy, you're amending the law and not replacing it with anything. Here we want to take this out and not replace it with anything. And I believe that if we're building a legislation to protect workers on the job, we should protect them to and from the job. And
Yes.
I agree that I might be wide in saying every vehicle, but certain vehicles owned by the companies and some sponsored by the company, because they may contract a third party, that we should seek to protect those workers coming and going from work in the face of an accident.
Member Brown, my only concern though, Member Brown, is that things like happenings on the roadway, they're governed by the Road Traffic Act. And I don't know if it is that the committee is saying that in circumstances where an employer has not breached any duty of care, whether an obligation is to be imposed on him by virtue of a legislation for him to accept responsibility.
Chairman, I just, again in my mind, I recall the definition that Mrs. Bennett Campbell gave in terms of workplace. Because as far as I'm concerned, that definition would also, or should also take into consideration these circumstances.
Mr.
You're at work.
Yes.
Yeah, but I am a truck driver. And my work, the truck is my workplace. But I work for Appleton Estate. So how does that, you treat with that in this definition? Because I just want to be clear. I was distracted a while, but why would we want to just merely collect statistics? What's the purpose? You know, so I don't. Okay, so how would this? We talk about the Road Traffic Act, yes, but how would this treat with the worker who works with an establishment or a company, and their substantive position is to drive and to be on the road, and we have many workers in that context. You just start a normal Road Traffic Act, go to the courts. How does this bill protect them?
Let's go.
Right, Chairman. So if you look at Clause 19, which sets out some of the primary duties of the person conducting the business or undertaking, what we're realizing is that some of the common law duties an employer has are being codified under sub 3. So some of these issues regarding commuting, for example, the provision of a bus to provide transportation for staff, what potentially could happen is that these codified duties, what you would do is rely on past interpretation that deals with those types of situations. So I don't know if that assists the case in saying that some of these common law duties are now being codified. So you would look at what the common law approach has been to an employer who provides that type of arrangement.
Yes, well said. Members? No, well, the ministry, before going to the ministry, I just want to hear from you whether, having regards to what Mr. Basco has said, whether you have any further response, Member Brown.
From A to M.
Of clause what?
Yeah, looking at clause 3, Mr. Bosco, 19.1.3. I think that's where you are. And I'm trying to see where transport fits in there.
So some of the concepts, for example, where you have the provision and maintenance of a safe system of work, safe plant and structure, it may not be that granular in terms of saying it applies to transportation, but it could fall a part of the system of work. So as an employer, if you provide transportation, was it a safe system of transportation that you provided? So I'm saying, not discounting the arguments that are raised, but that we could do some research to see if maybe that was something that fell within this rubric and we're now codifying it.
For the record,
Yes.
something that we oppose. The Road Traffic Act allow, as it is now, that my son have my car and him run some stoplight, that they can charge me for that breach, even though I didn't do it, and they can fine me. So this idea that employers didn't commit the offense, but somebody else committed, don't wash, given where we have gone with the Road Traffic Act. We opposed it. I certainly know Senator Skeffrey and I opposed it, but
Majority prevailed.
yeah, covenants.
All right, Ministry. You have heard the position from Mrs. Seeley Brown. Let me hear from you now, how you intend for the committee to treat with this clause.
Well, as Ms. Healy Brown has said, that this is really to statistics, and I also went further to explain that we need statistics to know how to move, because the data, Member Brown spoke about persons driving from the hotels and so forth. Where would we have captured that data to recognize that trend so we can have some form of intervention to address particular, maybe it's that industry that we're having a high incidence of commuting accidents, so we can further probe and determine what interventions, what policies that may need to be put in place to try and deal with the issue. For me, it's just the fact that if we use the term in the bill as a commuting accident, and it is a requirement for it to be captured, from that standpoint, we want to know that at least it is defined so that that it is known what this data represents. Jasper had raised, as you said, about the difference between the commuting and occupational, and they should be separated. We just want to ensure that we have that it is not confused as being an occupational accident.
Yes.
I'm thinking you should take it out and you can let the term in the convention guide you as to how you collect your statistics, because when you put it in like here, like that the way we've done here, it raises all kind of issues as to how it applies. That's just my view.
So how you plan to gather other statistics outside of just commuting accidents?
Well, for occupational accidents or incidents, section that deals with notification, the incident notification, that would be where we would get that, because it would be a requirement from the person conducting the business undertaking to report these occurrences. So we would have captured those occurrences and we could have had them for our statistical purposes as well to determine how to proceed from a policy or intervention perspective. But the commuting, as we said, is a bit different because it's not an occupational accident. It is one that occurs when persons are traversing from work to home, or as how we have set it out here, they are going to for the places of remuneration, to eat meals and so forth. So we can look and see what intervention may be required based on some statistical analysis of that data.
Chairman, I don't want to prolong it, but I just want to place on record that commuting accident ought not just to be a matter of statistics. That we need to find a way in this legislation to protect workers commuting to and from work and to place some liability somewhere on the employer. It would be in that situation. For example, I don't know, for example, if a worker meets in that their sick leave can't be extended. Because many workers have suffered and have no leave or no benefit. So in creating a new legislation, let's not just stop at statistic gathering on this, because we know, and the Ministry of Labor already know from data that they have, that this is happening often in the country. And so I just want to put on record where I stand on it, that I am not for treating this just as purpose of statistics.
Yes. So, Ministry, in terms of what is being asked of the committee, can you just tell us what you're asking in respect of this clause?
Well, Ms.
Yes, they are
Seated
proposing
Donald
that
had
it be
proposed that
deleted.
to delete it.
Okay. So, members?
I'm not for deleting it, you know.
Yeah.
But I'm just for expanding it. I just want that to...
Chair, because the issue, and we have raised concerns, the escape route is not to delete it and believe it's like a nightmare that you're going to just wake up and get rid of it.
But Chair, may I just make for clarification?
Yes.
In my view, when I look at some of the provisions in the bill, which I can't recall right now, that these are the primary duty of care, I'm sure that so I'm not saying to delete it because I don't think that we need to deal with it. I'm saying that it may be that we have dealt with it within the bill already, and the fact that the way it's used in the bill has nothing to do with what members are suggesting, and it creates that confusion. It makes sense to just delete it for that purpose and let that definition guide the policy in collecting your statistics. It's not that I'm saying that we shouldn't protect them in some other way, but I'm sure that the way provisions are there in the bill already which provide for that type of it.
You had given an indication
Very good
that
advice.
he was going to do some thorough research
Yes.
and get back to us. I would encourage that
Yes.
similarly,
Yes.
the ministry would pursue a similar agenda, because it's a real concern that has been raised, and until we are satisfied that there are areas, and there may very well be areas in the legislation that treats with it, but it's just that it's not coming out to us now, whilst your focus is on gathering of data.
Yes.
Chairman,
Yes.
I just wanted some clarification.
Yes.
Because just briefly, what we're seeing here, even from case law, is in circumstances where you have an employer who gave an employee an assigned vehicle and it was defective, the courts are leaned in favor of finding that it was a failure to provide a safe system of work.
System of work, yes.
So that's why I was saying that even that terminology, now that we're codifying it, it contemplates that type of situation. So I wanted to know if outside of that context, the committee was moving in a different direction. So if you didn't have a transportation arrangement, was the committee thinking about whether or not that should be captured in the bill?
Well, I think Member Brown should respond to that, but certainly from what I understand him to be saying is that outside of the duty of care as laid down in clause 90, he is saying that the act should contemplate circumstances outside of the breach of those duties as highlighted in clause 19. Member Brown?
Said what I have to say already, you know. And I just think that I don't see in the bill the protection for workers to and from work. I see in the bill the protection, the provision of statistics for people who get injured or have fatality to and from work.
Under clause 19, Member Brown, if it is that, and I'll go back to what Member Scaffery had raised about a vehicle, if it is that during the course of the duties, the employer provides a vehicle, and that vehicle is defective, then a duty would have been imposed on the worker in clause 19, and if he's in breach of that duty, then there's some kind of accident, then there's protection under this bill for that worker.
Let me propose, Chairman, we move from it and we come back to it. I take Senator Gale's point in respect to Mr. Vasco's comment.
Mrs. Silibron, you have a final comment? Because we are going to proceed. I think the committee is asking that the ministry revert to it in respect of this clause. So we proceed. It's now 11 minutes past 1. I think the lunchtime is fast approaching.
Before you break, Chairman, yes. I want to recommit apologies. I got a message, so, but at that point, just before you break.
Okay, very well. So, yeah. Yes, perhaps this is a convenient time, members. We will take the lunch and break now.
In that case, can I answer? Sorry.
Yes, so we'll proceed with compliance power after lunch. That's where we'll pick up. Yes, but
I ask a recommittal of apologies.
Yes, so we will recommit apologies for absence.
Yeah, Member Daly has asked, sent a message to me to ask the committee to extend his apologies to the committee for absence today.
Very well. Yeah. Duly noted, Member Daly has indicated his absence. So members, we will take our lunch break now, and we will return at 2 p.m. So we now break for lunch. That's our lunchtime. So we break for lunch until 2 p.m.
Pedestrians must be careful before crossing the road, especially at nights. It is important to stop at the side of the road, look right, then left, and right again. Also listen out for oncoming vehicles before crossing. Cross only when safe to cross. Educate yourself.
Want to learn how to use the internet?